A routine patrol led a police K-9 to an abandoned garage, but when he started digging, officers uncovered something no one expected. A rusted container buried for years held secrets that could change everything. What they pulled out next left the whole team frozen in disbelief. Here's the full story. But before we get into it, tell me your favorite dog's name in the comments and make sure you've hit subscribe. The old garage sat on the far end of the abandoned property, its paint peeling, roof sagging, and broken windows allowing thin streams of light to seep inside. It was the kind of place most people passed without a second glance. To the untrained eye, it was just another forgotten building swallowed by time. But for the police team and their K-9 unit, it was about to become the center of a mystery none of them could have expected. The K-9, a German shepherd named Rex, had been trained for years in detection work. He was steady, sharp, and fiercely loyal to his handler. That morning, Rex had been unusually restless. His ears perked at faint sounds, his nose constantly scanning the wind as though something invisible tugged at his senses. When the unit arrived at the abandoned garage following a routine patrol, Rex suddenly lunged toward its side yard and began clawing frantically at the hard ground. The officers watched with confusion. It wasn't like Rex to dig without reason. His body stiffened, his movements forceful, almost urgent. Dirt sprayed in every direction as he pressed his nose deep into the soil, then returned to digging with greater force. The handler tried to call him back, but Rex refused to move. His bark broke the silence, sharp and demanding as if warning that something beneath the earth was too important to ignore. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. What could possibly be buried beside a place like this? The garage had been abandoned for years. Neighbors said no one had set foot there in over a decade. Yet Rex acted as though the ground itself hid something alive, something that needed to be uncovered. At first, they thought it might be an animal scent. But Rex's behavior was different. This was not the playful chase of a small creature. His stance was rigid, his growl low, his paws relentless. Each strike of dirt seemed filled with purpose. The team began to wonder, could it be linked to the string of disappearances that had plagued the town years ago? Could the garage, with its crumbling frame and forgotten past, hide a truth that everyone had overlooked? The digging stirred memories among the older officers. They remembered when the garage had belonged to a reclusive mechanic who suddenly vanished without explanation. Rumors swirled back then. Some said he had skipped town, others whispered about debts and secrets. But no one ever confirmed the truth. The place had simply been abandoned, left to rot under the weight of silence. And now here was Rex, forcing that silence to crack open. The handler knelt beside him, brushing away dirt where Rex's paws had loosened the soil. What appeared first was not much, just fragments of wood splinters buried deeper than they should have been. Then came the metallic scrape of something solid. Rex barked again, pawing harder, his fur bristling. The officers crouched closer, their flashlights piercing the growing hole. What was buried here? A box? A tool chest? Or something worse? The tension rose as questions piled in their minds. Why had Rex chosen this exact spot? Why did the garage, forgotten by everyone else, still hold a pull on this dog's senses? And what would happen once they cleared the dirt away completely? The digging slowed as they reached something firm. It was rectangular, weathered, and heavy with rust. The officers began pulling at the edges, their gloves coated in soil. With a final heave, the buried object shifted upward. It was an old metal container, locked tight with corroded hinges and sealed with years of grime. The air grew thick as they laid it on the ground. Rex circled it, barking sharply, pawing at its lid. His instincts screamed that what lay inside mattered, that this was no ordinary box lost to time. The officer stood in silence, staring at the container that had rested in the earth for who knew how long. None of them spoke the thought lingering in their minds, but all felt it. This was not random. This was not chance. Someone had buried this box for a reason. The handler placed a hand on Rex's back, steadying the dog's trembling intensity. The box was carried closer to the patrol truck under careful watch. Every step echoed with unease. They could feel that they were holding a piece of something bigger, a fragment of a puzzle hidden for years. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, shadows stretched long across the cracked pavement of the garage lot. The container sat there between them, heavy with its secrets. Rex never took his eyes off it. He whined low as though urging them to open it now, to end the guessing and reveal the truth. But the officers hesitated. They knew they couldn't simply pry it open on the spot. Procedure demanded caution. Still, curiosity gnawed at each of them. What could be inside that box buried beside an old garage forgotten by all except this dog? The mystery pressed closer, wrapping around them like the evening air. And the questions kept circling. Who buried it? Why hide it here? And how had Rex, with his unshakable instincts, led them to it on this exact day? One thing was certain. The old garage, once silent and unremarkable, had just become the center of a story that was only beginning to unfold. And Rex, standing tall with his fur catching the last light of dusk, had pulled the first thread of a mystery that was about to unravel. The box sat heavy and silent on the back of the patrol truck. Its corroded edges glistened faintly under the flashlights, as though the years underground had fused it with the soil itself. Nobody wanted to touch it again. The officers stood in a quiet circle, their breaths visible in the cooling night air, every second stretched by the weight of what might be locked inside. Rex stayed closest, nose pressed toward the container, his body tense and alert. His handler had seen him react to weapons, narcotics, even traces of explosives before. But this was different. His movements carried urgency, not warning. He wanted it opened. The decision was finally made to bring the box back to headquarters. They secured it carefully, locked inside evidence storage until it could be examined under controlled conditions. Yet even as the truck rolled away from the garage, Rex kept whining, his gaze fixed on the container as though afraid it might disappear if he looked away. The following morning, under strict protocol, the box was placed on a reinforced table. Tools were gathered, cameras set, every step recorded. The hinges resisted at first, groaning under the pry of metal tools until the rust gave way with a sharp crack. Dust billowed into the air as the lid creaked open. Inside lay layers of faded cloth, stiffened with age. The officers carefully lifted them out, their gloves brushing against brittle fibers. Beneath the cloth were objects wrapped tightly in brown paper. Each package was pulled free and set aside, the mystery thickening with every movement. The first package was unwrapped. Inside were photographs, black and white. Their edges curled, their images faint but recognizable. They showed the garage in its prime, the mechanic who had once owned it, and cars lined up outside. But scattered among them were stranger images, people no one could identify, standing in unfamiliar locations, their faces captured in odd, candid expressions, as though photographed without knowing. The second package revealed notebooks, their pages filled with scrawled handwriting. The words were frantic, uneven, sometimes crossed out in heavy strokes. What they read was enough to make the room still. The notebook spoke of debts, threats, and secret meetings. They hinted at something hidden, something dangerous enough to force the mechanic into silence. The final package was heavier. When unwrapped, it revealed small metal lock boxes within the larger box. Each was labeled with numbers and dates. Inside the first lockbox was a collection of documents, bank slips, receipts, and letters suggesting large sums of money moving through hidden channels. The papers hinted at organized dealings that stretched far beyond the quiet town. The officers leaned closer, connecting fragments in their minds. The disappearances from years ago, the sudden vanishing of the garage owner, and the unshakable sense that something had been buried with purpose, all of it began to weave into a larger picture. Rex, lying at his handler's side, let out a short bark, startling everyone. His ears were trained not on the documents but on the last unopened lockbox. Something about it drew him in. The officers exchanged uneasy glances and carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay a smaller bundle wrapped in oilcloth. When the wrapping was peeled away, the room grew still. Resting inside was a collection of personal belongings, jewelry, watches, small trinkets that did not belong to the mechanic. They were items reported missing years ago, tied directly to the families of those who had vanished. The realization struck hard. The old garage was not just abandoned. It had been the center of something darker, an operation hidden behind grease-stained walls. But the box contained one final clue. Tucked beneath the belongings was a single folded letter. Its ink was faded but still legible. It carried the name of a person still living in town, someone respected, someone no one would have suspected. The words in the letter suggested betrayal, a warning about the garage owner being silenced if he did not comply. The team sat frozen. The mystery was no longer about a forgotten garage. It was about people who had shaped the town's past and possibly still had influence in its present. Rex growled softly, his nose pressed again to the letter, as though sensing that this scrap of paper was more important than everything else in the box. The officers exchanged looks that carried both disbelief and a rising sense of urgency. The box had done more than reveal secrets. It had reopened a case everyone thought was closed, one that still had unanswered questions. And somewhere in town, the person named in that letter had no idea that their past was about to resurface. The letter lay on the evidence table like a spark waiting to ignite. The faded ink carried a weight heavier than the metal container itself. It named someone still alive, someone who had walked the same streets for years, unseen behind the mask of respectability. The officers knew the name well. The man had lived quietly, his reputation spotless, his involvement in the community unquestioned, but now his past had crawled out of the ground, pulled into the light by Rex's relentless digging. The decision was swift. Further investigation was necessary before confronting him. The notebooks and documents were combed through in detail. Connections emerged, unexplained deposits, addresses linked to meeting places, and timelines that overlapped with the string of disappearances. The garage owner, it seemed, had been caught in the middle of something larger, pressured, blackmailed, and ultimately silenced when he tried to resist. What Rex had unearthed was not just a box. It was the missing bridge between the town's unanswered questions and the truth buried in plain sight. When the officers finally approached the man named in the letter, his calm exterior cracked. Evidence was laid before him piece by piece, and denial slowly eroded into silence. The photographs, the documents, the belongings of missing families, every fragment spoke louder than words. Under pressure, the truth came out. He admitted to orchestrating the scheme decades earlier, using the mechanic's garage as a front. When debts piled up and threats became real, the mechanic had hidden the evidence, intending one day to expose the corruption. But before he could, he vanished. The box he buried was his last act of defiance, a message to be found when the time was right. And that time had finally come thanks to Rex. News spread quickly through the town. Families who had lived for years with unanswered grief finally received clarity. The jewelry, the trinkets, the photographs, all were returned to them with solemn respect. It did not erase the loss, but it closed a chapter that had remained painfully open. The garage itself, once a symbol of neglect, became something else. Investigators combed every inch, uncovering hidden compartments, tools altered for concealment, and markings that matched the documents. Each discovery only reinforced the depth of what had been hidden. But in the end, what people remembered most was not the corruption or betrayal, it was the dog who refused to stop digging. Rex became a quiet hero, though he never sought recognition. His instincts had pierced through silence, unearthing what humans had overlooked for years. At the ceremony weeks later, the families gathered not for sorrow but for gratitude. They stood together in the town square, the old garage looming in the distance, as Rex received his commendation. His handler knelt beside him, hand resting gently on his fur, pride shining in his eyes. The applause echoed, not only for the dog but for the truth finally revealed. The past no longer weighed hidden in the earth. The town could move forward, its wounds acknowledged, its shadows cleared. And Rex, calm and steady, simply looked up at his handler as if to say he had only done his duty. In the end, the mystery of the old garage was not just solved, it was healed. Families found peace, justice was served, and the silence that once haunted the edge of town was replaced with closure. The story closed where it began, with Rex beside the old garage. Only this time there was no frantic digging, no buried secrets. There was only the loyal figure of a K9 standing watch over a place where truth had finally risen from the ground. Stories like this prove that sometimes the smallest clues change everything, and you do not want to miss the next one. So hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you subscribe now because the next K9 mystery might just be even bigger.